Welcome to Conversations with Big Rich. This is an interview-style podcast. These interviewed are all involved in the off-road industry. Being involved, like all of my guests are, is a lifestyle, not just a job. I talk to past, present, and future legends, as well as business owners, employees, media, and land use warriors. Men and women who have found their way into this exciting and addictive lifestyle we call off-road. We discuss their personal history, struggles, successes, and reboots. We dive into what drives them to stay active in off-road. We all hope to shed some light on how to find a path into this world that we live and love and call off-road.
Whether you're crawling the Red Rocks of Moab or hauling your toys to the trail, Maxxis has the tires you can trust for performance and durability. 4 wheels or 2. Maxxis tires are the choice of champions because they know that whether for work or play, for fun or competition, Maxxis tires deliver. Choose Maxxis. Tread victoriously.
Have you seen 4Low magazine yet? 4Low magazine is a high-quality, well-written, four-wheel drive-focused magazine for the enthusiast market. If you still love the idea of a printed magazine, something to save and read at any time, 4Low is the magazine for you. 4Low cannot be found in stores, but you can have it delivered to your home or place of business. Visit 4lowmagazine.com to order your subscription today. On today's episode of Conversations with Big Rich, we have Kurt Williams. Kurt is one of 3 Williams that I know in the Utah area, but he's not one of the 2 brothers that most people think. I thought so at first, but I was corrected years ago. Kurt is the owner of Cruiser Outfitters. We're going to talk about that business. We're going to talk about the Cruiser Heritage Museum. We're going to talk about Expedition 7 and X-Overland and everything else that evolves around Kurt. Kurt, thank you for coming on board and spending some time with us.
Well, thank you, Rich. Thanks for having me.
So let's start off right away. And where were you born and raised?
I'm from right here in Utah. In fact, I'm at my shop here in Murray, and I was born in Murray as well, so not too far away. Been fortunate to travel a lot around the world in different places, but I just can't really think of anywhere I'd want to live other than Utah, primarily because of all the amazing recreation opportunities we have here.
Right, and that is big there. Of course, there's people out there that are trying to stomp on all that, especially motorized. Maybe we'll get into some of that. So
we can talk all about that too. You bet.
Yeah. So how did growing up in Murray? What was it like back? You're in your late 30s now.
Early 40s.
Early
I
40s.
appreciate you saying that. That's kind of you to say, but early 40s.
Early 40s. So what was it like growing up in Murray 40 years ago?
You know, awesome. I really loved this whole area. I actually grew up in Sandy, which is just a little further south of here, kind of all one giant conglomerate of city. But I was fortunate. We grew up right on like the south end of Sandy, like the Sandy Draper border, and all growing up, we had an area just 5 minutes away called Corner Canyon. And I grew up riding dirt bikes up there. You could shoot guns up there, and certainly all through high school could four-wheel up there. And it was kind of a mix of private land and then Forest Service land kind of on the upper sides of it. And unfortunately, nowadays, it's all homes and development and closed off trails to motorize, which it's so unfortunate because that's kind of really what got me so interested in off-roading is the fact that we could ditch school or take a long lunch and go off-roading for a few hours in the middle of the day. And we did that a lot, too.
Right. And what kind of student were you?
Well, I'd say middle of the road. I mean, I enjoyed school and had a lot of fun, but I wasn't I wouldn't call myself a pure academic. I did exactly what it took to get through and get decent enough grades that my parents didn't put the hammer down on me. But I had a lot of fun in high school and junior high too. So I many great adventures and still very fond memories of all the fun things that we did that probably still shouldn't talk about too many of them to this day.
Especially if you ever have plans on running for political office.
Right. There's photos and video that will pop up one of these days, so I kind of have to watch myself.
Right. I get it. Yeah. So when while in school, did you participate in in sports or scouting or anything extra?
Yeah, I was really involved in scouting, which is a big thing here in Utah, or was at least then. It's kind of tapered off now for a variety of different reasons. But Boy Scouts are really big, so that had me in the outdoors a lot. And then, yeah, I played Little League football, and I wrestled all through high school as well.
Okay, wrestler. All right. And when you wrestled, what weight division did you start off as a freshman? I would imagine.
Oh, I was a little guy. I wrestled 119 as a freshman and a sophomore. Maybe sophomore I was up to 125, and by my senior year I had to cut quite a bit of weight, but I was wrestling 152 and 160.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. And did you go to? I'm gonna guess here. You went to college?
I did,
correct?
yeah.
Okay.
Right here in Utah.
And did you go to BYU or Utah?
University of Utah, yeah, the real school, the actual university. I went to the U of U. Graduated in. Let's see, God, man, I'm feeling old now. 2006. I went through the engineering program, so did the mechanical engineering program at the University of Utah, and absolutely loved it, and really, don't regret it at all.
So did you take those kind of classes, mechanical drawing, all that kind of stuff, in high school as well?
Not a whole lot. In fact, through high school, I did some AP and some college placement classes just to get a little bit of credit, but really I had a mind of being a business management major, which is kind of ironic given what I actually do now with my life, more so than like true mechanical engineering, though I definitely dabble in that a lot with the parts we manufacture and parts we support and tech support. But I got into, I started at the community college, Salt Lake Community College, SLIC as it's often called, or Redwood High School as I call it. It's kind of like the place you go if you don't want to get super serious about school right off the bat, which I wasn't necessarily super serious. I was far more serious about Land Cruisers, but to appease my parents and kind of keep progressing my life, I started at the community college and did business management. And I got a year, 18 months into that, just a lot of generals, but also started taking some business classes and kind of quickly decided I don't see myself really pursuing this as a degree. And I learned a lot, and right, wrong, or indifferent, I decided started looking around, and engineering had always been something I loved. I worked at a small engine shop as a teenager and had a Land Cruiser starting at 15 and was building that with my dad. So kind of always loved mechanics and welding. And so engineering just seemed like a more natural fit. And I jumped over to the engineering program, and that was that. Kind of stuck with that right to the end.
Okay. So the Land Cruiser, you said you're 15 years old. Was was Toyota's kind of the thing around the house? Or was it something that just intrigued you?
Just intrigued me. My dad had some of my earliest memories, and I barely remember this, was an early model, but early model full-size Broncos. So 78, 79, just after the kind of the relaunch of the newer, bigger Broncos, post box Bronco style. And I vaguely remember that. I can't claim to have any memories of that. Other than us owning one. But really, my dad had an F-250, Ford F-250 that we did a lot of camping. And again, kind of growing up on the south end of the valley there before it was all developed, there were a lot of dirt roads. And, on the way home from an event or something, we could talk my dad into doing some hill climbs and playing around. But just did a lot of family camping and boating. So we would end up using the 4x4s to drag a boat down a beach and play around that way. It wasn't necessarily go out to do a 4x4 trail, but we would go camping and thus do a 4x4 trail to get to where the camp was.
Right.
So kind of grew up around that. The Land Cruiser happened. I had a neighbor that had one, and I kind of didn't even know what it was. This is, I'm 10, 11 years old, and he was a hang glider, actually. And I always remember him having this Land Cruiser, which I would have easily mistaken as a Jeep at the time, with a hang glider on it, but I came to really recognize what that was later. But I was on a mountain biking trip in Moab. I was 14 years old, 13 or 14, and I was on a mountain biking trip with our scout troop in Moab doing the Porcupine, we were doing Poison Spider Mesa at this time.
Wow.
We were mountain biking Poison Spider Mesa, and I remember, and I somewhere have some old photos of this, back when you could have those little portable, not portable, but the disposable cameras, the action cameras that were the coolest thing
the
at
little
the time.
110 type things, yeah.
Exactly, with like 20 shots on them, then you drop the whole camera off at the local film developer. But I had one of those, and a group of Land Cruisers came through, and there was maybe 8 or 10 of them. I remember thinking like, hey, those things are so cool, like something. And that's when I kind of first started recognizing the difference between like a Land Cruiser and a Jeep. And by the time I was like 14, 15, I was really starting to look for a vehicle to buy and build. I'd always been into dirt bikes and go-karts and had mini bikes and things like that always around the house that we were tinkering with, and I would ride them all over town. And like Sandy was getting quite developed in the south end of Sandy by that time, so we were losing the big fields and places to ride, but I still kind of just rode dirt bikes all over the city and got away with it at the time. Kind of one more of those things you can't do these days without getting in a lot of trouble.
Right.
But yeah, so I started kind of shopping for one, and I was actually looking at Willie's wagons. They really intrigued me as well, to get like a Willie's wagon. And I looked at a few, and I remember I was like 15 years old, and there was this is when you're getting the newspaper to climb to the classifieds. And I remember calling, I'm like this 14, 15-year-old kid that knows nothing about cars, thinks I know a lot, but I know nothing. And I remember this guy telling me he has lockers, like this Willie's Jeep he had lockers, Willie's wagon. And I remember going like, oh, cool, it's got locking hubs. Awesome. Like, I know what those are because my dad had those on his truck. And the guy's like, no, this has lockers in the differential. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, those are great too. I had no clue what they even were, but here's this guy trying to sell me his Jeep. And anyway, didn't end up buying it. I went and looked at a couple Land Cruisers, and a family member heard that I was looking for a Land Cruiser, and I'm 15 at this time. And she says, you know what? My brother has one of those in the back of my parents' yard in like a little town, just South Jordan, just 5-10 minutes from here, south of Salt Lake. And she said, he's in the Navy now, and he's going to be gone for another 4 years, just re-enlisted, signed back up again. Maybe I know my parents would love to get out of their yard. Let's see if he'll be willing to sell it. So kind of took a few months of them writing him letters and negotiating all of it, but I was able to buy 1968 FJ40 for $1,500, and it was a pretty rough truck. He was kind of hard on it, but it didn't take much to drag it home and kind of get it running. So that's where it all started.
Nice, very nice. And what was the first thing you did to that Land Cruiser besides clean it?
Well, cleaned it out. Like there was probably 300 cigarette butts in a rather small Land Cruiser ashtray on the dash. So that took a little while. Little drug paraphernalia. He was kind of known as a partier in his earlier years before his Navy time. And so it took a little while to clean everything out. The first thing I did, and this is a sad story, is my parents have a little bit of a slope driveway. I'm 15, living at mom and dad's house, and they indulged me on letting me rebuild this thing on the side of the house with the help of my dad. He was a contractor, but kind of had always been into cars, so he was very supportive in helping me rebuild this Cruiser. But I had it on the side of the house on a little bit of a slant, and the tires were just completely rotted out. And like every day I'd have to air up the tires, and I'd go out there and kind of like try and get it to fire up with a little bit of starter fluid. It needed a carb rebuild. It needed a lot of stuff, but he would tell me, hey, go air up the tires so it doesn't just look like this riffraff on the side of our house so the neighbors aren't all upset. And so that day I went out and aired up the tires, and I had obviously been playing around with it and left it in neutral, didn't even think about it. And since it was flat tires, it didn't move. So I start airing up the tires, and it rolls back into the back of that F-250, my dad's, and put a nice big dent in the side of it. So that was a sad-faced day of learning the importance of securing a vehicle before you exit it, or checking on those things before you air up tires or do a recovery, for example. So I've never forgotten that lesson, because it was an expensive and sad one.
Yeah, I was going to say, how expensive was that for you? Did he make you do the repair or fix the repair?
No, he actually, it did nothing to the Land Cruiser, absolutely nothing. Just the way it hit on the corner, pretty strong still on the back of an old Cruiser, and it hit the bedside of his truck. We were able to kind of like pop it out most of the way, and it was a pretty clean F-250, but it was a work truck for him, so he was very forgiving and didn't, stick it to me too bad and make me pay for it, because we just popped the dent out and called it good.
Okay, good. And so then, besides airing up the tires and trying to get it started, what was the goal and process?
Well, so the ideal goal was to have that running by the time I got my driver's license, so I had something to run and drive. So this is back in mid 90s, 95, 96. I had a Spectre off-road catalog. They were like kind of one of the only ones with really good printed material back in the day, and still do. Still, a neat company. I would go through that catalog, just making lists of all the little things I needed, plus going to our local Toyota dealership and like bugging the parts guys for hours on end to go through the parts diagrams on their computer. And they were super nice, giving me all these printouts of different aspects so I could make lists, and just slowly started buying parts. And I worked at a little small engine shop in Draper, there's a little adjoining city, and made decent money for a 15-year-old, making, I don't know what it was, $9 an hour, which I thought was the world at the time and was really good pay. And I would use every penny I had to buy more Land Cruiser parts, and every birthday gift, whether it was from my parents or my brothers or my grandparents, I'd say, hey, I don't need anything special. I just need this Land Cruiser part. So I was borrowing and stealing anything I could to get that thing rebuilt by the time I was 16. And we ended up tearing it down a lot further than I hoped.
Right.
So I didn't have it done by the 16. So we ended up buying this somewhere along the way. A friend had a Suzuki Samurai, a 1987 Suzuki Samurai for sale for $500. $1,500 for the Land Cruiser. I paid $500 for a 1987 Suzuki Samurai that needed an engine rebuild. It was like blowing smoke out the tailpipe horribly. So my dad and I hurried and rebuilt the motor on that ourselves. And that was the vehicle I actually drove when I turned 16 while we were still finishing the Land Cruiser, because we ended up doing sheet metal and paint and everything on it.
Oh, wow. You went full in.
We went full in. Yeah. It spiraled out of control as we started taking things apart.
Right. That's pretty typical. My first vehicle and what I did that with was a 54 Volkswagen Bug.
Oh, very cool. Those are neat. And those are also super valuable these days.
Yeah. I don't have it any longer. I sold it when I left Utah, Cedar City back in about 2000. But still wish I had it, but nope, don't. So then
you gave it up.
Yeah, I had to. Anyway, I got a pretty penny for it. No motor, transmission shot, front end shot, but it had all the body parts, all the original body parts, and got $3,000 for it back in 2000. So it was, I didn't lose out too bad.
Very good. Well, yeah, you didn't do too bad. That's not shabby.
No. So then that Cruiser, do you still have that Cruiser?
No, I don't. Just like your VW, there's many days I wish I could say I did, and I wish I did, but I sold it for a reason, right? Like there's a reason at the time, whether it was financial or family, and so I don't necessarily super regret it. And it's been through a handful of owners, but I still know the guy that owns it. He's in Colorado with it now, and he's done a V8 swap and a lot of other things. So it's kind of fun to still see it pop up every once in a while. And I've had the chance to buy it back at least twice when it's been listed for sale. And it made no more sense then than it did to keep it. So it was what it was. And I sold that to finish building a 40 that I have now that I think I sold it in 99 or 2000. I sold that 68 FJ40 to finish building the 1972 FJ40. It's a blue one that I still have to this day. So I've had it for coming up on 25 years now.
Nice. You get through high school, you've got your Toyota, and did you keep your Suzuki around for a couple of years, or once you got the Toyota done, you got rid of the Suzuki?
No, the Suzuki stayed around for a little while. That thing's like a early side-by-side, I call them. They're like the original side-by-side. When you think about the size and the capability of those little machines,
Yep.
I still have a really soft spot for those. And so that stayed around for a few years. In fact, one of my brothers started driving it. He was using it as a pizza delivery vehicle in the wintertime, so he wasn't driving his car. I can't, all the dynamics, and then ended up selling it to a friend that used it for a while, and I haven't kept track of it since then. But so having a 4x4 was important to me, whether it was the Samurai or the Land Cruiser. And I guess I should back up a tiny bit there. The reason I in my mind, had to have a 4x4 was when I was that same age, 13, 14, my mom and dad gave me some books for a birthday or Christmas. I don't remember, some ghost towns of Utah and some lost treasures of Utah, the road's mine, all these cool old legend books. And I was 100% convinced I was going to be a gold prospector by the time I could drive. and that I would spend my entire summers in between school up in the mountains prospecting for gold and climbing through old mines and checking out ghost towns, which I still do a lot of to this day, but it didn't come to fruition as a 16-year-old that I was living off the grid as a mountain man as I would have hoped, but I did my best. So that's kind of why the 4x4 made sense for me. And that then it turned into becoming, I would call myself a cruiser enthusiast. And then that turned into a business in later years.
Right. And so, like, through high school, you said you had a job making $9 an hour. What was that again?
I worked at a small engine shop. It was called the Pipe Connection in Draper. It was a landscaping supply place. We didn't sell like pipes as you would think these days. We're not Colorado. This is Utah. But it was called the Pipe Connection, and I worked on small engines like sharpening chainsaw blades or rebuilding lawnmower engines. So it was a fun job, and got to start collecting some of my own tools, buying and collecting tools. So it was and it paid pretty well too for being 15, 16 years old.
And after that, what did you step into?
Well, so after that, I ended up getting a job at the local AutoZone. Had been in the AutoZone grabbing parts. It was the closest parts store to my parents' house and kind of closest to my high school there. One of the closest, and just ended up kind of meeting the manager because he recognizes a kid in there buying parts all the time. Because I've got these old projects that always needed something or needed oil changes. And he ended up offering me a job at some point. So I worked at an AutoZone for a couple of years, just in probably just that would be my early college years. And I did some construction along the way too. With some of the AutoZone was a night job, but kind of got me dabbling in buying parts and figuring out who sold what around the valley. Made it really good to know where to get all the different things I was always hunting down.
Right. And then what was the transition from working for other people to having Cruiser Outfitters? When did that transition take place?
Yeah, so Cruiser Outfitters actually existed. It started in '92, so well before I even had a driver's license, and it was in downtown Salt Lake as a Land Cruiser shop. And there were a couple cruiser heads that ran it, and I started going down there. I probably went for the first time. I remember going in '95 before I had my driver. This before I was 16, like after we bought that first '68, because I remember having to get my mom to give me a ride there. I couldn't drive there, and I was looking for a roll bar, just a factory Toyota roll bar. The '68 didn't have a roll bar in it from the factory. There was nothing when you took the top off, and my parents had made a rule that if I was going to take the top off of the Land Cruiser, I at least had to have a factory roll bar bolted in the back. So I went down and bought one, and at the time it was maybe $100. And I remember the first time I went there, I remember seeing so many Land Cruisers, like, 50 plus Land Cruisers in the parking lot, in the parts area where they're parting out, taking things apart, and just like drooling over, oh my goodness, this is like paradise for me to sit and look at all these different ones. And I'm sure to them I was just this annoying kid with a bazillion questions, but they were super generous to kind of keep indulging me in answering. And then over the years, the next 3-4 years, I bought a lot of parts as I rebuilt that '68. And then just after '98, '99, just after high school, I had been down there a lot and got to know Daryl, who was the previous owner of Cruiser Outfitters. And I was wanting to start building a new 40. I kind of had some ideas of things I wanted to do to the next one to make it a little bigger, better yet. And then my first one. And he offered me a job parting out Land Cruisers. He had maybe called 10 or 12 cruisers outside on kind of the street, on this little side street that were all wrecks or super crusty, rusty ones. And he said, if you part all of those out this summer, you can have all the parts you need off of those to build the cruiser you want to build. Just build them from scratch. Put disc brake axles off a 60 on a 40 frame. Just, kind of make a mud of a cruiser, but with this vision of what the perfect setup to me was. And I don't think he thought I was really going to do it and take him up on it, but I did. So I would, in between my other jobs and that summer, I spent all summer taking apart Land Cruisers. So the process was it was a lot of fun. We'd use the forklift, and I'm like an 18-year-old, right? This is like the coolest job in the world, to get a lift Land Cruisers onto a trailer with a forklift, and they're beat up ones, so you're just ramming the forks through the roof. They're usually crusty or rollovers. We'd put them on a trailer, and then I would put them on jack stands on the trailer in all sorts of sketchy ways using a high lift, and then pull the axles out. We'd pull engines, trannies, TKs, anything that was valuable parts. We would pull all that out, put it in the parts warehouse, and then just basically build it like this carcass on there, and then part out a couple more in the parking lot and jam all their bad or crusty or unusable parts into those, and then take to the scrapyard. So I learned just a ton about Land Cruisers by taking them apart. Didn't mean I knew how to put them back together, but I at least knew where everything went on one of them.
Right. That's half the battle.
That's half the battle, yeah. So, and in the process, he totally honored the deal and gave me all the cool parts I needed to build the 40 that I still have now. So I started building that in '99 and finished it like in 2001. So it took me a couple years, and he let me use the shop there after hours, or kind of keep it parked over in a corner, and built it just kind of out of all different parts from tons of different vehicles to make one FJ40 that had kind of the goods I wanted. So late model 2F engine, 60 axles, but the 5-speed transmission, so kind of like the best of things that I wanted to have on my dream cruiser.
Awesome. And then, so after that, working for, dismantling and warehousing parts and stuff like that, and then building your own, how long did it take until you became either a partner or the owner?
2 years. So two or 3 years, 2001. So along that process, got to know Daryl really well. He's an amazing, neat gentleman that had been building cruisers for a lot of years and had some really cool ones himself. He decided somewhere like kind of in 2001 timeframe that he's going to go and get out of cruisers and go be an underwater dive welder, like commercial diver. There was just a ton of money in it at that time. He didn't have like any, huge family or commitments other than the shop that he owned, but no commitment that like really kept him from being able to go do that. So he was basically looking to sell the company, and he listed it with like some business listing services that came in and took photos of everything, and we're going to try and sell it for like a pretty big amount, like as a runnable business. And nobody took it. Nobody snatched it up, and had a lot of people come look at it and just say, hey man, this is neat, but I don't know anything about Land Cruiser. So it'd be really hard for me to just take this over January 1st and you leave and here it is. Right. So it just never sold. So in the meantime, I'm still helping him part out cruisers, and got to know really well what we had there through parting them out and the building of my own. And I had already known the gentleman, the folks at Spectra Off-Road, including Marv and Kay. And I had gone down there and picked up parts before for Cruiser Outfitters and for my build, as well as just gone down there. If my family's on a vacation in California, I make them drive to Spectra to let me go wander around as a 15-year-old, because it's just paradise, right? Get to see Land Cruisers. I've done that to other shops around the U.S. and the world as I've traveled. But so I knew Marv, and somewhere the conversation came up that, hey, would you be interested in buying all the used parts we have? So that was kind of going to be Daryl's exit strategy, and I helped broker that deal. Marv and Kay came up to Salt Lake, spent a day going through all the parts with me, kind of showing them what we had. We had kind of a big shop area, just pretty organized, but also just typical parts shop, the stuff everywhere. And he ended up buying not only all the used parts from us, but he bought all the shop equipment too. That was Daryl's kind of personal stuff, because the building was just leased. So I helped, then spent the next few months before Daryl's departure, palletizing all that stuff. So we ended up shipping 2 diesel loads, 2 full tractor trailer loads of parts and equipment down to Spectre. And they were pallets stacked floor to ceiling as tight as we could, shrunk wrapped up, and then loaded into a diesel. So it was a lot of stuff we shipped down there of used parts. And really had no intentions of doing anything beyond that other than helping Daryl just sell off the business. And I got a lot of parts out of the deal as we were kind of parting things out and saying, hey, I need that for mine. And, he was very generous that way as I worked there. And then in the end, he was like, what are we going to do with the business now? It's still Cruiser Outfitters. It's still got accounts at ARB back in the day, like way before they were a mainstay, and accounts with Toyota dealerships and other vendors. And I said, well, man, let me buy that from you. And so I wrote him a check for $10 just to have a monetary number to put on a check, and bought it and officially took it over as of January 1st, 2002. So
wow,
it's been a while now, but yeah.
$10. Huh?
Meantime, I'm still $10. Yeah. Cause there wasn't really any, I got like a truckload of stuff that the Toyota dealership wouldn't take back, or Marv didn't want, or we forgot to load up on a pallet or something. It wasn't much, it just didn't take over a whole lot.
An established name and goodwill.
Yeah, exactly. So and that's what I saw tons of value in, and as did Daryl, but he wanted to go to a good home, just didn't want to just walk away from it. So I took over the PO box bill. I took over we transitioned the bank account. So he got the money. He took all the money from it because it was his, rightfully so. And I opened a new bank account. And as of January 1, 2002, it was mine. Good, bad, or indifferent. It was mine.
Interesting. And at that point, what was obviously it's a business that you wanted to work. So was it all about, and you had no inventory basically? Did you have a building, or did you just have the name and a bank account and saying, okay, I'm going to get started on this?
That's it. I had the name, a bank account with no money in it, because I started, probably put it, whatever they make you have, $100 to open a bank account, a business account at the time, and just a tiny bit of random inventory, not even really anything sellable. And meanwhile, Daryl didn't do any internet or e-commerce business because, well, that wasn't really happening at that time anyway, not to any degree. And he was a full in-person shop. So we were doing paint and body and reskins of sheet metal tubs and exhaust and engine rebuilds. It wasn't like shipping parts. Like, he did very little of that because just didn't have the time. But, and yeah, no building, because the building was leased and the lease expired that exact same time frame. And they came in and ended up being a Eurosport, like a BMW shop after that. So yeah, I took over what was there, but the most valuable thing to me, the name was valuable, yes, had some cachet, particularly in the local cruiser community, but the accounts were what was valuable.
Right.
Because at the time, a lot of people didn't even know who ARB was. Cruiser guys kind of did, but it was still not a household name. Getting a Toyota dealer account wasn't a huge deal, but it was something. Having a wholesale account with some history there. And then West Coast Differentials and some of these other early brands that we were dealers with back in the late 90s, mid 90s. So there was just some cachet there. And meanwhile, I'm still a full-time student at that point, and still working a construction job and part-timing at AutoZone. And I kind of gave up on the AutoZone one, said, hey, that's too much. I got too many irons in the fire, and just I was working construction, doing school, and selling Land Cruiser parts.
And how did you acquire the parts? Was it just buying up old Land Cruisers, or did through your accounts, new stuff?
Both, but mostly focusing towards moving towards new stuff.
Okay.
Though I'd still buy 40s and part them out, and I'm 21, 22 years old, living at mom and dad's house still as I went through college. I was actually working on moving them out of the house. That was my story. I was always going to tell them they needed to move since I'd lived there my whole life. It wasn't fair. They were very, very kind to let me, as long as I was going to school and working, I didn't have to pay rent. And I took advantage of that because I also ran a business out of their house for a while too. And they didn't always love that, but pallets would show up of Land Cruiser parts, and they had like a little side shop building that I could use, a little shop place I could use to store parts, and I would part out cruisers on the side of their house, but kind of outgrew that within a couple of years and had to get my own place. But yeah, so I would just sell parts online and buy new stuff, and I was on Pirate early in those days. I think I joined Pirate in '99 time frame, and Mud in the like roughly not too long after I Hate Mud kicked on, and would just kind of peddle parts on those places. And I remember being on Pirate and browsing the classifieds for people's wanted ads, like, hey, need 456 gears for my Land Cruiser. I'm going like, hey, I can order and sell those. I've got an account for those. So I would order them and drop ship them, or order 2 of them and sell 1, and just started building an inventory from there. And we've kind of just kept on rolling that same principle from that time, other than now we stock over 7,500 different parts in our building here in Murray.
Wow, I was going to ask you how many SKUs you had. So that's pretty good. It's pretty good.
It's grown a lot. Yeah, we stock a lot of inventory. So now we drop ship about nothing. Our goal is we ship everything kind of same day as orders is our best goal. So even right up to a full suspension kit, if they order it before 3 o'clock or so, we can still have it palletized and shipped the same day, like a full leaf spring kit. We we build transmissions and T cases, and we usually ship those within 24 hours. So you can buy a brand new 5-speed transmission and split T case for any 40, 50, 60, 70, et cetera, and we'll ship it within a day or two. So we've really aimed to have enough inventory here to support that.
That's awesome. And how many guys do you have working?
There's 12 of us. Yeah, 12 of us here at the shop. So about half of those are supporting either phone or e-commerce customer service and sales. And the other half would be shipping, and then like one full-time doing installs and tech stuff, and a couple that help with that as well.
Okay. So you're not just selling and rebuilding parts, but you're building or repairing vehicles as well?
We do, yeah. Mostly just builds and installs. We don't get into any like restoration services anymore.
Okay.
Haven't played in that game for a long time. But we'll install suspensions, bumpers, winches, snorkels, as well as a lot of turnkey builds. So, for example, right now we're building a bunch of identical brand new 200 series Land Cruiser, which are the latest generation here in the U.S. So they're full builds. They actually get shipped over to Germany, and they cut the back half of them off and turned into campers, and then come back to us, and we do the bumpers, the skids, lockers and gears, front and rear, fuel tanks, suspension, kind of the whole works. So do a lot of full turnkey builds like that, as well as we've been really fortunate in the last few years to work with Toyota and Lexus corporate and doing some builds. So we've had builds at SEMA in their booths the last couple of years.
Oh, very good. So how did the Land Cruiser or the Cruiser Heritage Museum spin off of all that?
So meanwhile, I'm just all things Land Cruiser. My life doesn't ever get too far away from Land Cruisers through my mid-20s and into my 30s. My wife's an amazing human being and an absolute saint, because she puts up with all this all the time. This is Land Cruisers all over the house, and Land Cruisers, we don't go really anywhere that doesn't somehow end up involving Land Cruisers. And so she's a rock star about it. And I met a gentleman named Greg Miller, local to Salt Lake here, well known in the Land Cruiser community because of his affinity to Land Cruisers. But his family is like the Larry H. Miller Group, that a lot of Toyota dealerships and other vehicle marquees. And met Greg through an event that he was planning, and invited me to be involved in the early planning, called Cruiser Fest. And that's just kind of an all things celebration of Land Cruisers. And that event still goes on to this day and has become part of the Land Cruiser Museum. In the early days, though, it took place out at the Miller Motorsports Park, which I know you're familiar with, because
Right.
There were rock crawls there back in the days, which in another hat I wore, I did competitive rock crawling in the early U-Rock and old school rock crawl days. Did that for quite a few years and had a lot of fun there. But so I kind of knew some of the people there, and knew that organization. We ended up doing the Cruiser Fest event at the same spot where the rock crawls all took place, and got to know John Williams, who you mentioned in the intro. And John is my uncle, by the way, not officially, like there's no paper trail of that, but if anybody asks, John is my uncle.
Okay.
That's what we refer to him as. Yeah, he's the older one.
All right.
Fantastic. John's shop is like 3 minutes from my shop here in Murray. We're practically neighbors, but
Okay.
both busy guys, so we don't get to catch up enough. But so we did Cruiser Fest, met Greg through that, and that was an all-things celebration of Land Cruiser. Still happens every year. It's a really cool event. And through that, an event called Expedition 7 spooled up. And that was with Greg Miller and Scott Brady. And Scott Brady is the publisher of Overland Journal, the founder of Overland International and the Expedition Portal Forum, et cetera. So kind of really early groundbreaker in that kind of realm of overlanding and expedition travel. And Greg and Scott, I actually introduced him. Scott was in town for the Outdoor Retailer show, and we just got together at a mutual friend's house. Paul May was doing a little industry party at his house, and met, and those two ended up going to breakfast and talking about their shared love of Land Cruisers. And Greg said, man, wouldn't it be cool to drive Land Cruisers on all 7 continents? And Scott Brady said, yeah, actually, I'd love to do that, and I've even planned kind of a similar trip, but with motorcycles. So anyway, things kind of spooled up, and they ended up pitching this idea to drive Land Cruisers on all 7 continents, and that's called Expedition 7. And I was invited to be part of that on the first leg, the North American leg, and then subsequently ended up doing 5 continents total with Expedition 7. And we took those Land Cruisers are on display at the Land Cruiser Heritage Museum. So Expedition 7 is a really neat story. Talk all about that because that was a lot of amazing adventures. But during Expedition 7, as we traveled, Greg and I often talked about there needs to be a one place that is like the Land Cruiser Museum. And the Land Cruisers used for Expedition 7, the first 2 were called VDJ-78s. They're troop carrier turbo diesel Land Cruisers, not available in the U.S., unfortunately. They came out of Australia. And Greg and Scott were able to go to Japan and ceremoniously watch those vehicles come off the assembly line. It wasn't the exact vehicles just because of the timing of automobile production, but they got to watch the same vehicles come off the assembly line.
Right.
While in Japan, they went and visited a bunch of auto museums, including Toyota museums, and Greg really noted, like, hey, there's not like a Land Cruiser museum. Like, what? There's a Land Cruiser in a museum of Toyotas, but not like one place to celebrate this amazing vehicle, which is undeniably an uncontested Toyota's flagship vehicle. So he set out to change that. So through the Expedition 7 journey, as we're traveling and spending inordinate amounts of time together on these road trips through many countries around the world and looking at seeing so many cool cruisers around the world, we spooled up this idea of what the museum would need to have to be properly called a museum, like do it justice to call it a museum. And then that's how the museum formed. And that's where the idea came from. And Greg had both the vision, but also the financial means to kind of make that possible and spooled up from there. We're now in the 3rd location, which is in downtown Salt Lake in a building retrofitted specifically for the museum. And it is just absolutely amazing. Like, it's a must visit.
Excellent. And let's talk about the Expedition 7, the 7 continents. You did 5 of them. What continents did you? Which ones did you do besides North America?
Yeah, so I did North America, and then following North America, the vehicle shipped over to Europe. I didn't do the Europe section. Greg actually did that with his family. Had a bunch of family members come over, and they toured through Europe, which is kind of the easier areas to travel because it's just how easy it is to go country to country in Europe, particularly. And then I came back in and did the Asia section, which was like through Russia and Siberia. We drove all the way through Russia to Magadan, which is a really neat adventure, and right now not even remotely possible. So glad we were able to do it when we did. After that, the vehicles shipped to Australia, and I did the Australia section. We crisscrossed all over Australia, including doing the Canning stock route, did a self-supported trip on that, which is an amazing adventure, 1,899 kilometers of self-supported travel, so kind of think 1,200 miles, which was a really neat off-road trip. And then from there, the vehicle shipped to Africa. We did a really amazing journey through South Africa, Namibia, and Botswana, including a lot of cool game drives and driving, something special about being able to drive next to elephants and rhinoceroses. Pretty cool.
Yeah.
And then we did the Skeleton Coast there too, which was also a very unique dunes, about 1,000-mile route through sand dunes on the Skeleton Coast. Very, very remote area. From there, the vehicle shipped to South America, and from there, the vehicle shipped to Antarctica. One Land Cruiser went from Africa to Antarctica, so I did not get to do that one. That would have been an amazing adventure, but they had a great trip and did it justice. But they only sent one vehicle, not the full fleet of trucks, which had grown to 3 at this point, 3 E7 trucks that we were traveling with. And then they all regrouped again in South America, and we drove them all the way back to Salt Lake from the tip of South America. So they shipped into Buenos Aires, and we drove them all the way down to Ushuaia, which is Patagonia, the southern drivable portion of the Pan American Highway, and then drove them all the way back to Salt Lake, and got back just for Cruiser Fest, which was happening that weekend. It was kind of quickly planned timing, and those vehicles are now on display in the museum.
That's pretty dang cool. And how many people would be each vehicle?
2 to 3 per vehicle, and sometimes more. There were segments where we had Greg had family members or just other friends from the community. He really wanted it to be about sharing those experiences with as many as possible. And I think he's often said one of his biggest regrets is ever having empty seats in the vehicles, like even 1 or 2 empty seats in the back, because that would have just been a great spot, an experience to get to know somebody and enrich them too by traveling. So he did his best to fill the seats whenever possible.
And how much time did you spend in Australia?
I was there that trip, I think, for about 10 weeks.
10
we
weeks?
did
Okay.
to crisscross Australia. Yeah.
Okay. Because I know that Shelley and I went and visited. We were there for like 18 days. And I decided the next time I go back, it's got to be for like 6 months.
Yeah, it's easy to cover a lot of ground and spend a lot of time in Australia. Likewise, my wife and I, we went in 2006 with a couple friends, or another couple, some friends that were also Land Cruiser, the Land Cruiser buddy of mine and his wife, and we were there. We did like a 3-week trip, and it was just like go, 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 which was great. We covered a lot of ground, but we said the same thing, like next time, 6 sounds about right.
Right. Did you ever have any run-ins with kangaroos?
We ran a lot of run-ins with kangaroos, like literal run-ins with kangaroos. Yes, unfortunately, there were some kangaroos that didn't make it.
Yeah, well, that's all right. The
That's what happens.
kangaroo lovers, sorry,
kind of like a deer in the U.S.
Yes, exactly. I tell the story when we first got to Australia. The first 4 or 5 days, all I saw were dead kangaroos, and I swore that the tourism board was just throwing dead kangaroos out on the road so that tourists could say they saw one, and we pulled into this national park, which Australian national parks are like state parks here in the United States, I would say. Quite a bit different, than a national park here. But we pull into our campsite, and there's 3 big gray kangaroos standing there. I mean, they weren't there when I first pulled in, but as I'm unloading the Land Rover that we had rented, I turn around and, just within feet are 3 big, mean-mugging kangaroos. And you always see the pictures of the bodybuilder kangaroos, like they're on steroids or something, and that's exactly what these 3 look like. And they probably came to my nose height, and all I thought about was, oh my God, I'm going to get jumped by this, by 3 kangaroos. Did you ever have any close calls?
Yeah, I mean, we had some that would get kind of like quite close, even in camp. They'd kind of roll through, but nothing like real close calls. More so with camels. There's a lot of feral or call them wild camels throughout Australia, outback as well. And I'm far more afraid of one of those. As far as an animal striking a vehicle, it's quite different than hitting a low slung, low center of gravity kangaroo.
Right.
You don't want to hit any of them. Like that's not the goal. Certainly not the goal. But it happens when you spend that much time on the ground and that much driving. But camels are far scarier as far as what would happen to hit one of those with a vehicle.
Oh, it'd be like elk. They'd take the roof off.
Precisely. Yeah, that was. So we definitely were on guard for that situation.
So then, when you're in Australia, how many vehicles did you have there? 2 or 3
so
at that point?
3 vehicles. We had, 2, the original 2 VDJ 78 Troopies. Those were really only set up. They could haul 4 people, but they had all the living apparatus inside, like full bed systems, fridge systems, kind of everything. So they were best set up for 2 people, because then you didn't have to take the beds apart to go back to passenger mode.
Okay.
Which we still did a little bit just to accommodate as many people as possible per Greg's want and desire. But really, it was becoming evident we needed a people hauler. And that actually happened on the North American trip. And that's what got me involved, is we ended up taking a little a 70 series 2-door truck, pickup truck, to be the equipment hauler, and really to kind of haul around camera gear and help ferry other supplies around. So this other truck became involved. But that truck had a different diesel motor than the V8 turbo diesels, and it kind of was just incongruent in its travel. So we ended up, Greg wanted to get a truck that had the same platform engine and a 4-door, because then it could haul more people, but also it was still a truck, so it could haul a bunch of gear. So I went over to Australia early before the Expedition 7 trip got there, and we pre-built a VDJ79 four-door truck, had all the goods. So it was built very similar with the bull bar, the winch, everything off-road gear, but had a tray back canopy on the back. So kind of think a big enclosed box that have become quite popular here in the U.S. in the last few years. But this was a decade ago. They were very popular in Australia even then, and that became like the equipment supply hauler. So for example, when we did the canning stock route, we had 9 drums in the back of that truck to carry all the diesel fuel.
Right. Okay. What about this X Overland?
Yeah, so Expedition Overland is a YouTube adventure series, and it's now on the Overlander Network, which is kind of like a paid network where you can watch episodes, but they'll eventually end up on YouTube later on. So it's a great group of folks. And I met Clay Croft, who's the founder of Expedition Overland, through Expedition 7. So Clay and I both traveled to Russia together to do that Russia, Siberia, Asia segment of Expedition 7. Clay was going to serve as the cinematographer for that. So the whole adventure was filmed and photographed for different media outlets, also just for Greg's archives of the adventure. And I'd met Clay previously, Team of the Year before. This would be maybe 2011, I guess. He was there pitching his up-and-coming adventure series that he was planning to film. They were going to drive to Prudhoe Bay, drive up to Alaska and film it and do a YouTube series. And he was there looking for sponsors. So I kind of met him there. And there was the previous cinematographer for Expedition 7. His name's Bruce Dorn. He's done a lot of really amazing stuff. The videographer, I guess. Bruce had an eye injury and couldn't come to Siberia for E7. So Clay was a fill-in. And Scott Brady gave him maybe 48 hours to decide if he could go. I was already planning on going, but Clay said, yep, I'm going to shift some things around. I'm going to do this. This is a great opportunity. And so he and I really got to know each other by traveling on that trip. It was, we just had 2 trucks at that point, the 2 Troopies. So there were 4 of us. And then we had a Russian fixer with us, Andre, an awesome human being that helped us navigate all the nuances of traveling in Russia. So got to know those. Yeah, we'll call him a fixer. Yeah, just kind of
sounds like a hired mafia protector.
It kind of feels that way. Yeah, he wasn't private security by any means, but he had traveled that area. He's a 4x4 enthusiast from Russia, but he also just kind of knew how to get through weird situations like border checkpoints, and we got pulled over a handful of times for paperwork checks, and he'd get out there and just puff cigarette smoke in an officer's face, and they'd puff smoke back at him, and they'd yell and argue a bit, and then we'd get back in the cars and drive like nothing ever happened. It was he was the guy to have. He just made things happen. And really, he just kind of knew the route through Siberia, because that is like the road of bones, and pretty fairly established road. We could have certainly navigated, but it was good to have him there to really add some local flair and flavor and help us embrace the culture too by being an interpreter. So he was just absolutely a great resource. But there was 5 of us. So you travel with 5 people for a month. You really get to know them and chat a lot about their plans and goals and what they've done in life and what they want to do, and really learned all about what Clay was planning with Expedition Overland, which was at that time to drive up to Prudhoe Bay. Take some friends and film an adventure series and try and spool something up in that world. And overlanding, this I'm using my air quotations right now, and expeditioning and all these, now common industry buzzwords were really new 10, 11 years ago.
Right.
And Clay and Scott were kind of breaking ground and really getting that whole industry moving. And they weren't doing it because they wanted an industry around it. They were doing it because they loved that kind of travel, and they knew that other people did too. But it was fun to learn what they want to do, and Clay was planning his big trip, so was excited for him. Well, fast forward another year, I had just finished driving back from South America with Expedition 7. We drove, as I mentioned, from Patagonia all the way back through South America, shipped the vehicles from Colombia, from Cartagena up to Colón, Panama, and then finished driving through Central America back to Utah. Well, Clay was getting ready to go the opposite direction, because he had just finished the year before they had done their Pan America trip up to Prudhoe Bay, and now they wanted to drive from Montana, where they're located, down to Panama and do the Central America portion of the Pan American Highway. So he'd just been calling me, asking questions like, hey, what was travel like here? Or what's this border like? Or how did this work? Or how do you do this? And I was answering the best I could and helping them with any intel and information. And I traveled down there a few other times in between, Guatemala and Panama and Costa Rica. So had a pretty good vibe on those areas. And he finally was like, "Can you come on this trip with us?" And so I said, "Absolutely. It sounds fun." And we drove they picked me up in Salt Lake, and we spent maybe 6-8 weeks. Could have been even a little more, like 8 or 10 weeks driving from Salt Lake down to, we did Baja on that excursion, ferried over to the mainland, and drove all the way down to Panama and made it into the Darien Gap into Yavisa, which is kind of like the last little outpost town before you would have to cross the Darien jungle to get to Colombia, which you can't really drive. So we accomplished that trip, and since I've been on a whole lot of trips with them. We did all of South America and finished the Pan American. We've done Australia, a couple different trips up into Canada, doing the Mackenzie Trail. We've done, trying to think of other places, got a lot of cool places, and we just this last year did a Nordic series where we did Europe, primarily Scandinavia, so Finland, Sweden, up in that area, Norway, and then they ship to Faroe Islands and Iceland before coming home. So that stuff's all just going to be starting on YouTube in a couple weeks here.
Nice. Very nice. What are your plans for the future? Do you have any grand plans on any more travel or?
Nothing like super set in stone, but just always looking at opportunities. We like to go visit the Dakar. I haven't ever raced the Dakar. That's kind of on my hit list one year. One of these days, I don't know if it'll ever happen because it's financially a lot of money, but just logistics, it's a lot too.
Right.
But we've, a group of us, we desert race. So we have raced the Baja 1000 8 or 10 times now. And we run a Land Cruiser in that. Of course, don't get too far away from Land Cruisers. So we've got some desert racing again coming up this year. We'll do the full bore series here in Utah and probably race the 1000 in Mexico again. And that same group of guys, there's a few of us that really want to do Dakar, as I was alluding to. So we've traveled down to South America a few times, and we've been over to Saudi Arabia twice to watch the Dakar as well, just to learn more about it, see what the bivouacs are like, see what the cars are like, see it first person. So that's on a bucket list. I don't know if I'll ever get there.
Right. Right. Is that the same team that Woody helps out at the 1000 or comes down to?
Absolutely, yeah. Woody and Heather have come down a handful of times with us over the years and helped do run pits and pit support, and absolutely, yes. Yeah. So we've been doing that for about a decade now as well, running it's called Kangaroo Racing. Yeah, great group of folks, and we have a big group. And this year we actually supported 2 cars. The 1000 last November, we raced our car as well as an LX600 Lexus, which is like the new Lexus SUV. We did a race support for a team from Japan, and we'll probably help them again this year too.
Very good. That's quite a plateful of travel plus business owning. Do you see the business continuing to, as long as they keep producing new series, you'll always have something to work on? Because I would imagine that the old FJ40s they're such a classic anymore. It's kind of like the old Broncos. Trying to find them, old ones is more difficult. Is that true?
Yeah, no, it's 100% true. And I kind of wonder and worry about the shelf life on the Land Cruiser business, as I have for a decade, but it's actually just continued to grow for a couple reasons. One is we still sell a lot of repair parts, the boring stuff like bearings, sills, gaskets, tie rod end kits. So it's not all just about the fun accessories that customers kind of only buy once. A lot of what we sell is the boring stuff they need every 5 to 10 years, the knuckle rebuild kit, the clutch kit. So we've imported and assembled kits for a lot of different just service items. And because of that, half of our business is actually wholesale, which means we're selling to a lot of other cruiser shops and even Toyota dealerships, or just, Tom's Tire in Kentucky or something. They get a Land Cruiser in and they need a knuckle rebuild kit or a tie rod end kit or a rear axle sill. Yeah, they can probably find it other places because, certainly they're out there. When I say other places, like not traditional cruiser shops, but they would rather call us because we know it's going to fit, and we kind of put it together as a kit that comes with the sills, the gasket, the diff gasket, all the items they need to do the job. So there's more growth for that to happen. But the cruiser market in general, now that Land Cruisers, they're so prevalent around the world. They're not as prevalent in the U.S., though it's a good-sized market. But once a Land Cruiser is 25 years old or older, it is legal for import to the United States. That's our federal laws. Canada is 15 years. Different countries have different rules. But we are seeing just a flood of import Land Cruisers coming to the United States. Once they hit 25 years old, everyone wants these cool turbo diesel and diesel 70s and 80s, and the 100 series will be coming up next. So there's just some really cool models coming over. So and I got in on that kind of personally early, bought an import Land Cruiser right when they first became legal, a 70 series. It was in 1986. So it was like a year after they were legal to have in the U.S. I bought one, and we've really done a lot to stock parts for those models too. So ironically, they're not our biggest part of the business, but a decent part of our business is selling parts to Land Cruisers that never even came to the U.S. Now, we do ship a lot internationally, but a lot of those are just going towards owners of those import vehicles stateside and Toyota dealerships that get one in their shop and can't get a clutch kit for it through their normal channels, but we have a clutch kit for a HZJ 70 series in stock, for example.
Nice.
So that'll continue to grow. Yeah, so there's some excitement there. And Toyota made the Land Cruiser into the U.S. up until 2021, the 200 series, and there's lots of hints and rumors that something new is coming. So I think there's still some runway for us.
Good. I know that you're on my to-call for shopping list. I just posted up a little while ago about the Shelley wanting to rebuild her Series 60 1984 Land Cruiser, and it is like bone stock, 412,000 miles, and it's got a rod knock.
Nice.
And I know that like the tie rod ends are held together with hose clamps, things like that. And I got a broken leaf spring, and of course some from frame rot and all that kind of stuff. But she wants to build the motor herself.
Well, those are all things we can help with. That's our world is parts for engines, parts for steering linkages, and I think that's kind of part of why we do continue to grow. Is we're actually finding more solutions than ever. Like I'll tell you one that I'm personally excited about. It's full nerdity, but we now have stock leaf springs for 40 series and 60 series. And when I say stock, they're made in Japan to stock specs, look exactly like a stock spring. And that may sound so counterintuitive to most, going like, man, I'm going to buy a lift kit if I buy new springs. But there's a big contingent of Land Cruiser owners that don't actually take them off-road. And that's great. They build these because they want them to be preserved as originals, and they drive them on Sundays. Or maybe they do a little off-roading, but they don't necessarily need a lift kit. So we're really excited to have those springs. And here we are, a vehicle that hasn't been made. The newest one was made 35 years ago, right, or 30 some odd years ago, and we're still now tracking down new parts, new offerings for those vehicles.
Well, that's awesome.
Your 60 series could be a great example of one that would need stuff like that. Maybe you don't need a lift kit or even want one. You want it to be stock. So
yeah, because I was thinking
for those options.
I was looking, and the only thing I could think of was going to, like some 2.5-inch old man emus, and with that then becomes, you start looking at tires, bigger tires, and then you look at, gearing. And it was just like, oh, now it's going to, just go blown out of proportion here. So I think going the stock route is ideal. That's what she likes anyway. So
yeah, and if you want to build it for off-road use, the OME couple-inch lift, it's fantastic, right? And bigger tires. There's so many pros to that. But if she just wants to keep it stock, well, it's fun that there's more options like that popping up. Not just from us, the community in general. Is reproducing a lot of really cool parts. And on the note of the 40 series, you kind of mentioned they're not making them anymore, and you're right. Of course they're not. But now, just in the last 3 months, a new company popped up, and they were at SEMA last year. There's actually a couple companies, but one has a California warehouse now doing full replacement Land Cruiser sheet metal. There's been industry companies doing door skins, door parts, tubs. Aqualoo up in Canada has been doing aluminum parts, but these guys are now doing like full turnkey complete sheet metal kits for a 40 series. So you could buy everything, like a full body from them, not just a tub, but a top, doors. And there's already been companies making reproduction frames. So, there's companies like Jonathan Ward at Icon that have been building turnkey brand new Land Cruisers using all new and late model parts. And he uses Aqualoo tubs and builds beautiful vehicles, but that's going to open up even more now that there's more options for those other parts. And I don't think it will slow the economy of those vehicles at all. In fact, it's just going to grow them, that people can build something from scratch, or maybe restore something that people previously looked at and said, hey, that thing's unrestorable, right? It's too far gone. It needs to get parted out. Now you may say, hey, there's a frame. That's all we need to really start with.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. That's a great idea. Cool. So personally, kids, you're married?
Yep, happily married. I've got an amazing wife, Candace, that she puts up with all this and actually even kind of embraces and supports it, which is still amazing that she's willing to dive in on this and put up with me. She's a rock star. No kids. We have 2 dogs, 2 German Shepherds that travel and do a lot of camping with us, or provide security and companionship when I am traveling when she's not able to make it. But yeah, she's really busy. She's got she's in food sales and does a lot of travel, and yeah, she's got a great job and does really good things there. And I travel a fair bit. So yeah, kids never came into our picture. I've got a bunch of nieces and nephews that we love to spend time with and hang out with, but we'd love to send them home at the end of the day too.
Yeah, I was going to say that's always easier. That's the great thing about being a grandparent. You know, we got 8 grandkids, and you know we can visit them, and that's perfect.
Perfect, and then send them home. Yeah,
exactly.
No, we just wasn't our life plan, the way things kind of worked out, and yeah, but we're both happy. We live in Sandy, kind of the same, a little ways away from where I grew up, couple miles away, but she also grew up in that same area, and the two of us have traveled a lot, and we just kind of never really had an inkling to move anywhere far away, because we both love Utah's recreation. So she mountain bikes and hikes, and we do a lot of camping, and of course I do a lot of off-roading, and I ride dirt bikes and kind of play around some other things, and just love Utah. You know Utah well. We're 70% public lands, 70% federal lands, plus get into Sitla lands and other state-owned properties. We've got pretty fortunate recreation opportunities, and despite the many efforts from a lot of angles to reduce those opportunities, we're still pretty fortunate.
Right. Before I left Cedar City, one of the things that we were battling with the feds over was the Escalante Grand Staircase, and them wanting to close everything down there, and that was being pushed by SUA and the Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance or whatever, and it ended up going that direction, but yeah, that's a shame. You can still drive the major roads through there, but you can't drive the canyons or the washes or anything like we used to. So hopefully that 2477 RS 2477 keeps more of those old roads and accesses to the backcountry open.
Agreed. Yep, definitely. I'm involved. I'm actually doing a class in about 2 weeks now, teaching a class about land use. RS 2477 will be a major topic of that, as well as state 10-year right-of-way. So in one of the other hats and irons I have in the fire is still very active in a lot of different land use fronts. I was a president of the Utah Four-Wheel Drive Association for quite a while, and I'm a Tread Lightly master trainer too. So definitely have a passion for that, both because I love to visit those places personally, but also as a business, I see that there's not going to be much need for off-road parts and equipment if there isn't places to use them in the future. So I both selfishly and for my business, I guess that's selfish too, perhaps, but I want to see those opportunities preserved for the future. And Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument, GSENM. That's a tongue twister, isn't it?
Yes.
That one's a great example that they came in and made that a national monument. Bill Clinton did that from not even in Utah, did that from Arizona, as I recall. And it took quite a few years for all of those route closures to fully be implemented on the ground. But when the dust settled, it was bad. Like, so many neat recreation and motorized opportunities were limited to major corridor roads. And everybody from all sides will agree that the motorized recreation is a growing population, right? With the advent of side-by-sides and their popularity, but not just to mention van life and all these other outlets for people to drive motorized vehicles on public lands, the number is bigger than it ever has been. So putting a growing amount of users onto a dwindling amount of recreation opportunities is not a management strategy to me at all. That's a horrible management strategy. Now you're just corralling more users to less opportunity. That makes no sense. So I am 100% against historic route closures of any routes that were legal and open. I think they all need to be open. And you may or may not know this, with the new borders of the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument, those routes were going to be preserved and restored, Rich. They were going to come back. But then we had another election yet again. So we had the new one. President Trump's administration rolled back the size of Grand Staircase National Monument, or Staircase Escalante National Monument, and they rolled back the size of Bears Ears. But then it just got reversed yet again, so we never saw the fruit of all that. We never saw those routes restored. So There was actually one route, Horse Canyon, in Grand Staircase that we went and drove because it got reopened during Trump administration, and now technically it's closed again because they rolled back the previous monument status. So it's a mess down there. It is a mess. And then, you enter the state's RS-2477 claims, the state and county Class D road and 2477 claims. It's ugly, and it's going to be in litigation for years.
Yeah, and you're talking about the dwindling opportunity for a growing segment. Where we noticed it in California a lot was the Imperial Sand Dunes. It includes Glamis and all that area. And, what used to be just, hundreds of square miles, thousands of square miles, like, the size of Johnson Valley or more, they've cut it down to where now everybody is recreating in such a small area of Gordon Wells and the Glamis that they say, now it's overpopulated. There's too many people. You guys are, what they've done is they've brought inner city problems out to the recreational areas because they forced everybody, elbow to elbow.
Yeah, it's mismanagement from the top down. It's bad. It's easy to get doom and gloom, and certainly areas have it far worse than others. Fortunately, Utah as a whole we've still got some amazing recreation opportunities for motorized recreation.
Right.
But every year, every month, there's something new. There's some new resource management plan revision, some new travel management plan. There's always efforts to reduce that. Not to mention, SUA still has grand visions for their Red Rock Wilderness Act and their wilderness bill. And somehow, despite that same growing number of users and same growing number of issues on the trail, they keep finding more wilderness. So is there even a problem if they keep finding more of it? Maybe we just don't need to do anything. But somehow it's gone from 3 million to 11 million acres of wilderness they've found. And if that ever were to happen, that would be a major, major hit to motorized recreation and access opportunities. It's not just about recreation. It's about access to some of these places. And that would be a major hit if that ever happens.
Right, because they don't need a big block. All they need to do is block the avenues of access.
Right.
So that's people need to be aware of that and help support those land use groups that are trying to keep things open or reopen things, and vote wisely. Vote wisely.
That's it. Yeah, and it's support the companies that support those efforts,
yes,
and don't support those companies that don't want to see motorized recreation. It's always heartbreaking for me to see like a four. Right, exactly. We can name names too, right?
Patagonia.
But it's always heartbreaking to see somebody's 100% Patagonia. Yeah. It breaks my heart to see. It's Patagucci in my mind, but when somebody's got their Patagonia jacket on, telling you how they love this trail, and you're going like, those guys like put money into closing this trail, the trail we're standing on. They want closed to motorized use. It's no joke. It's that real. That's how that's that black and white. It's that cut and dry. That's how it is.
Absolutely. Well, Kurt, I want to say thank you very much for spending the time with us and talking about your life and your adventures, and especially the land use at the end here, because that to me is, I fought the battle pretty hard in the early 2000s with what, with the Rubicon and some other, and just I got burned out on it. But now that I've got a little bit more free time, I'm looking at throwing some energy into that. The other thing I'm going to throw energy into, and I'm going to ask everybody else to do as well, is the Off-Road Motorsports Hall of Fame. It's not just about competitions and racers. It's about businesses and land use and, everything off-road. So, people need to look at helping with land use and spending $25 a year helping the Off-Road Motorsports Hall of Fame too, because how are we else can we recognize those that have fought the fight? So.
No, that's a great point. I need to learn more about that myself. I've followed it more in the recent years, just as there's been inductees that I've personally known and been people recognized and familiar with the organization. But I need to deep dive and learn a lot more about that and support it myself. So that's a great reminder.
Excellent. Well, Kurt, thank you very much, and look forward to talking to you some more when we go to get parts for the 84.
Sounds good. We'd love to help. Thanks for the opportunity to chat today, Rich.
Okay. You take care.
All right. We'll see you.
Okay. Bye. Well, that's another episode of Conversations with Big Rich. I'd like to thank you all for listening. If you could do us a favor and leave us a review on any podcast service that you happen to be listening on, or send us an email or a text message or a Facebook message, and let me know any ideas that you have, or if there's anybody that you have that you think would be a great guest, please forward the contact information to me so that we can try to get them on. And always remember, live life to the fullest. Enjoying life is a must. Follow your dreams and live life with all the gusto you can. Thank you.